Hey, I just had a quick question. I was looking at this story when the disciples only had one loaf of bread left, and they started talking about that, and then Jesus gets upset with them for some reason. Yeah, you remember that? Why? What's the deal there? Why is Jesus upset? Who ate what? Mark 8:17. Was Mark even there? Oh, okay. You know what? I'll just call and ask someone else. Thank you. Thanks, bye. Oh, hello there, and welcome to our next installment of Something Like a Sermon. Today we'll be looking at Mark chapter 8, and this is a really pivotal text, an important text. It's the fulcrum of Mark's gospel. The stuff that happens here is happening at the very center of Mark's gospel, and it is sort of the centerpiece of what he has to say, and everything changes from here. Once we get past to the end of chapter 8, Jesus is going to be on the way to Jerusalem, and that phrase is going to catch on and take on a significant role in the rest of Mark's gospel. So we're going to be eventually at the furthest point north, like 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, and from then we're going to turn around and start the march on the way back to Jerusalem, ultimately where Jesus will take up his cross. So Mark 8 is very important, and we'll come to that text in just a moment, but the build-up here in Mark chapter 8 begins with the feeding of the 4,000, not the feeding of the 5,000, but the feeding of the 4,000. And this is a miracle where they had 7 loaves and a couple of fish, few small fish. The people eat and are satisfied. Jesus multiplied the loaves. There's some baskets that they pick up the leftovers with, that sort of thing. Then they continue down and get in the boat, and there's some showdown with the Pharisees there, and then he goes to the other side, and while they're going to the other side, the disciples realize that they had forgotten to take bread with them. There's a bunch of bread stuff happening in Mark's gospel. You'll see this is a theme. He's warned against the leaven of the Pharisees he just has when they're in the boat. And now the disciples realize that they've forgotten to take bread. And we just had a big bread thing with the feeding of the 4,000. So you'd think it wouldn't be that big of a problem if they had forgotten bread. Maybe Jesus would be able to figure out a way to make sure that they all could eat some, even if they had only one loaf left. But that's the problem in the disciples' eyes, only one loaf left. And they begin discussing this. Jesus is aware of that, and so he asks them in verse 17, Mark 8:17, "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember the stuff that's happened?" And he kind of quizzes them a little bit about the 5,000 and about the 4,000 and that sort of thing. Okay, so the bottom line here is a question. Do you not understand? We've had theme of bread over and over again, and there's a question in Mark 8:17 and also in chapter 8, verse 21, about understanding and about seeing, and that's an important theme here. The very next story in Mark chapter 8 is the story of Jesus healing a blind man, except it happens surprisingly in stages. It's sort of like the first attempt didn't actually work. And when Jesus first lays his hands on him, he asks him, "Do you see anything?" And you see, "Well, I kind of see people walking around, but they kind of look like trees." And then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. So you got this bread theme, and you got this seeing theme, and all of that leads up to this passage, culminates in this passage in Mark chapter 8, verses 27 and following. This is the pivotal text the fulcrum of Mark's gospel. And we've kind of introduced it by way of healing, which serves as a parable. The disciples are sort of like the man who can kind of see a little bit, but not see quite clearly enough yet. That they've been in the presence of Jesus, and he's kind of helping them to see a little bit, but there's still something lacking. And Jesus is wanting them to get to the point where they see clearly. And Jesus, despite his frustrations from time to time, is actually patient, quite patient. And he'll have some stern words, certainly from time to time, as we'll see in this text. But just because the disciples are not seeing doesn't mean that he kicks them out or says, okay, you've tried hard enough, 3 strikes and you're out. He always is wanting the disciples to be on that road of trying to see clearly. And most of the time, the best you get out of the disciples is that they kind of see a little bit. Sort of like the blind man and the man after the first stage of being healed. He's seeing a little bit, but it's kind of not clear, and you kind of wonder, what is that? I can't quite tell. Looks like trees walking around, but I guess it's supposed to be people. The disciples are like that often. I think Mark's trying to point out that that's sort of what following Jesus is like for a lot of us a lot of the time. We don't always see clearly. And sometimes we will be at odds, direct odds with what Jesus is actually trying to accomplish. And that situation comes up here in the text. Peter is going to be in direct opposition. Not just that he's not seeing clearly, he is in direct opposition to Jesus' vision for what his ministry is about and what discipleship is about. And we'll see that even then, Jesus, although stern and, not afraid of offering rebuke or correction, he is still going to offer and reissue the call to follow me, to come back and follow and keep trying to see, keep trying to understand. So verse 27 of Mark chapter 8, Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. This is the farthest north that they're going to be from Jerusalem. And on the way, there's that phrase, on the way, he questioned his disciples, saying to them, "Who do people say that I am?" Major question. Isn't this the question that Mark's gospel is trying to answer all along? Who is Jesus? Jesus' question, first of all, is who do the other people, who are all those people out there saying that I am? And they said, well, some people say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say you're one of the other prophets. In other words, you're one of these really important prophets come back to life. A lot of people are saying that, Jesus. And, probably heard those things. That's not a surprise. But now the question is turned to them. Verse 29, who do you say that I am? Asking it to all the disciples. So the disciples, the 12 are there, and there's also crowds around too. So it's not just a small group of people here. But he turns it to the disciples, saying, who do you say that I am? And Peter answered and said, you are the Christ. In Greek, you are the Messiah. So that's the right answer, isn't it? Peter got it right. So that's a great moment in Peter's discipleship. He's seeing clearly, right? That's what we're assuming in the text. Peter finally got to that second stage where he is seeing clearly, and he understands who Jesus is. But Jesus warned them to tell no one about who he was. We've seen that lately in Mark's gospel, the Messianic secret. Okay, you know who I am, but don't tell anyone about it. And we've discussed that in a different message. But then Jesus, in verse 31, began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating this matter very plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. Who's the one that's seeing clearly right now? Who just won the award for best vision? Peter. He just got the biggest question in all the world right. Who do you say that I am? Messiah, Christ. Okay, so everybody start listening to me now. I'm the one that's seeing clearly. Now Jesus starts trying to tell Peter what the Messiahship, what Messiah means. What is the meaning of that word? What does it mean that I'm the Messiah? And he talks about suffering, dying, and rising again on the third day. Well, Peter, he's seeing clearly, so he's going to go and immediately correct Jesus, rebuke him. He's going to take him by the ear, and he takes him off of the path where all the disciples and the crowds are following Jesus, and he turns Jesus around and says, now you listen to me. Treats him basically like a child and says, you listen to me. That is not what Messiah is about. It's not about suffering. It's not about dying. You don't know what you're talking about. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him for his definition of Messiah. Now, verse 33, but turning around and seeing his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you're not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. Now, that's a famous verse and a powerful verse. We're all familiar with that one. Get behind me, Satan. What's going on here? Peter actually did get the answer right, and we can't give him that hard of a time, like what I'm kind of doing to him here in this lesson. We shouldn't really give him that hard of a time, though, because after all, Peter is right. If there's anything that the Hebrew scriptures say about the Messiah, it's what Peter is envisioning, right? It's this holy victory and conquering of the enemy, and it's victorious. And there's nothing about the Messiah suffering or dying or losing or anything like that. It's about victory over the enemy. That's what Peter's trying to tell Jesus about, as if Jesus didn't know that already. So Peter has the word right. He has the answer right. But Jesus has a totally different definition of what that means, also according to the scriptures. But Peter's missed out on that. And so there's a difference of what they're seeing here. That's what the discussion is about. And they're at odds. These two visions are at odds with one another, these two visions of the Messiah. So Peter, feeling cool that he had the answer right, actually didn't understand the meaning of it or how you got to that word, Messiah, even though he knew that was the final answer. It's sort of like my kids. I have one in second grade and one in first grade, and they both are learning a lot of math and doing really well. And their teachers always want them to do the same thing. They want them to explain or show how they got the answer. And what's going on in the text is sort of this Messianic math problem. Yes, Peter got the right answer, but Jesus wants to know, what do you think that means, and how did you arrive at that answer? Because when you show your work, that really explains whether or not you understand it or not. You can get the right answer, but we don't know how you got that. Did you look at the person next to you and copy what their answer said? Or, did you just guess? That's cool, you got the right answer, but Jesus wants them to show their work. How did you get that answer? What do you think that means? Do you actually understand what that's about? And when Peter tries to show his work on the Messianic math problem, he demonstrates that he doesn't understand what this is about, even though he got the answer right. And so Jesus patiently, sternly, after being, sort of spun around and pulled by the ear and disciplined and put in his place by Peter, who has taken him off to the side to give him a rebuke, Jesus turns around and said, "Hey, let's make this a public conversation, Peter. We don't need to be off on the side in a private conversation. Let's bring in everyone into this conversation. You're rebuking me because of my explanation of what it means to be the Messiah." Jesus turned around and saw the disciples, looked at them, and he rebuked Peter. He says, "You get behind me, Satan, for you're not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's." So what's happening here is a direct attack and opposition to what it means to be the Messiah, and Jesus calls Peter out on that. And I'm sure that would really stick in your memory if there was ever a moment when Jesus ended up calling you Satan, and I'm sure that was an important memory for Peter. Now, what does he mean? Does he mean that Peter's actually Satan? I don't think we need to explain this very much. No, but it's Peter is functioning as the Satan, which means the adversary. Peter is functioning as the adversary in this scenario. He's not following along behind Jesus. He comes around the front and gets in the way of Jesus and says, "You stop right there. No more going on the way," to whatever that means and wherever that is. This parade on the way is coming to a halt right here, and I'm going to stand in front of Jesus and block whatever it is that you're walking towards, because that's not what Messiah is about. Jesus turns around with Peter and says, let's talk about that a little more. And he calls him Satan. "You're standing as my adversary, as the adversary of the Messiah," and what that means. So he summons the crowd in verse 34. The crowd and the disciples come, and he says, "If anyone wishes to come after me," which is basically the same phrase that he has said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. Come around to follow behind me, Satan." And now he's saying, if anyone does wish to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. He calls Peter Satan, but in the same text, in the same conversation, he's not kicking him out of the disciples group. He's not saying, "Okay, you just did the worst thing possible. Now I don't want to ever see you again. Get out of here." Jesus, when Peter thinks that he is seeing the best he's ever seen, understanding the best he's ever understood, actually is in direct opposition, in an adversarial role to Jesus and his vision and his purpose as the Messiah. And even then, Jesus will give him that stern correction, but he still says, "Come around behind me again to follow as the disciple." Still giving him that chance, still holding out that faith, that hope, that relationship, giving Peter, in his patience, that chance to still see eventually. "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself." Peter, you especially right now, you're standing in the way of the Messiah. You got to deny yourself and take up a cross and follow me. That's what it means. You're going to look an awful lot like the Messiah if you're going to follow him. In fact, you'll look exactly like the Messiah, because you too will be taking up your cross. Jesus' vision for this world ultimately got him killed. And Jesus says that if we take this seriously, then we have to be willing to face the fact that there will be powers that stand against us. If we take Jesus' view and vision for this world, which is God's vision for this world, if we take that seriously and start walking that walk, if we actually live our life on the way to making that happen, to living that out, then there's a good chance that we'll end in a cross, with a cross, on a cross. And I don't think that's only a metaphor. In some cases, it's very literal, very true. But whatever you want it to be, a metaphor for persecution, metaphor for facing different hardships because of your faith, that's the bare minimum. It's a cross. And I think Jesus means that, in some cases, or maybe in many cases, that it actually is about a cross and about dying. In other words, the vision that Jesus has for this world is worth dying for. And he says, if you really believe that, if you really want to follow me, you have to be willing to die for it. Maybe it won't happen to you, maybe it won't happen to me, but the point is that you're willing to die for it. And some people, how do you get a cross? How did Jesus end up getting a cross? Well, he was condemned to death, right? Condemned to death by the Romans, and they give him the cross to carry. So normally the cross is the thing you get after everything's said and done, and it's your last moments, and you get a cross, and you carry it to the place of your crucifixion. Jesus is saying that you should expect that to happen, but he's not saying, okay, if you follow me, you might end up getting the cross. What he's saying is, if you want to follow me, deny yourself and go get a cross, take it up, and follow me. He's saying if you want to follow me, pre-order your cross. Have it right away. Expect that you're going to be using it. Start carrying it around right now, because eventually you would have received it anyway. Don't wait to see what's going to happen. Don't just kind of follow, and then if it gets too difficult, you say, oh, the cross is really, I might get a cross out of this. That's too hard. No, he says, you're signing up for the cross the second that you say you want to follow me. So it's pre-ordered. Here it is right now. Take it up and expect that one day you're going to be on it. Some things are worth dying for. And this vision for the world, this vision of righteousness, this vision of justice, this vision of peace is not one that everyone holds in common or desires. But Jesus says it's the only way. It's the only answer, and it's worth dying for. And in this month in particular, every year, we're reminded in the month of February of people who really did give up their life for the vision of Jesus' peace, Jesus' justice, his vision of righteousness in this world. And there's so many more besides throughout church history that have done the same. The last section, the last few verses of this text are really important. I see that we probably won't have much time to discuss them, but these are some of the most important texts in all of Scripture, and I want to encourage you to read them. I'll read them right now real quick. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. So you can see why we're not going to talk about that. That's another 25 minutes or 25 hours or something like that. These are some of the most discussed, debated, talked about verses in all of Scripture. what these things mean, including chapter 9, verse 1 as well. But it's about something very important, and the structure of it's really cool too if you get a chance to study that, but I'm not going to discuss that right now. But I do want to say that it's worth thinking about and it's worth discussing as Christians what these verses mean and how they are to be applied in our life. And I think my favorite way, the best way of entering into that discussion, the discussion that needs to be had, is something I recommended a while back, several years ago now, maybe 3 or 4, I don't remember. But there's this book that I told you about called Silence, Shusaku Endo. This is one of my all-time favorite books, and it's about this, about these questions, about these statements in part. It's about so much more as well. It's about the word silence, the silence of God, in fact, as the title suggests. But it's also about this, when these situations become real-life situations, these things that verses 35 through 38 are discussing. What is one to do or not do in those situations? So it's a fantastic book. And if you'd rather see a movie instead, there's a movie by the same title, directed by Martin Scorsese. Awesome movie, and that's worth watching or worth reading, because it brings us into that discussion that is important to have as Christians. The discussion of, especially verse 38, whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory of his Father with the holy angels. That sort of thing. Okay, so that's a look at Mark chapter 8 and the Messianic math problem that we've seen here with Jesus and Peter trying to figure out what the Messiah is. Messiah and discipleship are about the same thing. They're about the cross. The cross is the fulcrum of the gospel, and we see that here in the fulcrum of Mark's gospel at the end of chapter 8. So I want to encourage you to think about these verses this week, and also think about the thematic question about seeing. Am I seeing? Am I seeing clearly? Am I seeing a little bit? And how would I know? How do I know what sort of vision I have? How accurately I'm seeing things? How is one to know that in the first place? And how do we go about figuring that out? I think those are important questions for us to consider as we enter into this Lenten season. Blessings to you on this Lord's Day.